We often assume that the threads connecting us to others are simple and clear: friendships, shared experiences, family ties. But sometimes, the bonds between two lives are forged in the most unexpected ways. What happens when two women, strangers to each other, become forever connected by the same tragic fate? Hi, I'm Cam,
And I'm Dev.
and you're listening to Criminalish, a true crime podcast where two best friends exchange stories ranging from the wild and wacky to the downright messed up. So, Dev, today I'm going to tell you about the murders of Amie Hoffman and Deirdre O'Brien, which took place in New Jersey in 1982. Have you heard of these cases before?
Definitely not.
All right, well, we'll definitely get into it, but before we do that, what you drinking?
So, I really didn't have anything to drink today. So similarly to how a few episodes ago, Cam hopped on ChatGPT and told it to make her a drink, I got on ChatGPT and told it to make me a simple drink with tequila because I had tequila and that's what I wanted. And so I have a tequila sour that has melted a little bit, but it is literally just tequila, lemon juice, and simple syrup. And it's pretty good. It's gonna hit the spot tonight. What you drinking, friend?
So I am drinking another rum spritz, which if y'all missed it on the earlier episodes, it is rum, some seltzer water that's like kiwi strawberry flavored, and some lemon juice. And it was a ChatGPT inspired drink. So like I said, I'm going to be telling Deb about the murders of Amie Hoffman and Deirdre O'Brien. But before I get into it, I do want to extend a trigger warning for sexual assault. So I'm going to start with some background on Amie Hoffman. Amie Hoffman was born October 21st in 1964 in South Korea. We don't know much about her early years, but we do know that at the age of 5, she was adopted by Florence and Frank Hoffman. They already had 2 daughters, Bobby and Kelly, and they lived in a little township called Troy Hills in Morris County, New Jersey. Now, Troy Hills was the largest township in the county, but it was still a pretty quaint area that was ideal for growing families. And what likely led to Florence and Frank adopting a child from South Korea was that Amy's father, Frank Hoffman, had spent time in Korea while he was a soldier in the US Army. And growing up, Amie was described as a smart and kind child who not only worked hard, but also had a lot of integrity. In 1982, Amie is 18 years old and a senior in high school. She's on the cheerleading team, is a popular girl with a close-knit group of friends. On top of her being a cheerleader, she also works part-time at a store called the Surprise Store at the mall. I looked into it and it seemed like it was really a thrift consignment store that sold all different types of clothes. So on the morning of November 22nd, 1982, Amie wakes up not feeling well and decides to stay home from school. She spends most of the day chatting with her mom about a bunch of different things. And the next day on the 23rd, Amie still isn't feeling that great, but she decides to go to school. She was likely pushing herself to go because there was a big homecoming game in a couple of days where she would be performing as a cheerleader, and she had cheerleading practice that day. I'm sure Dev knows how important it is to go to those practices, as Dev was a cheerleader in a former life, right?
In a former life, yes, I was a competitive cheerleader and I literally broke my body and pushed through all kinds of not feeling good in the name of competitive cheerleading.
Exactly. So I really just want to highlight, Amie was not only book smart, she also was super popular in school, and she was also athletic. Being a cheerleader is not easy. So she gets done with cheerleading practice around 4:45, but her shift at the Surprise Store starts at 5 p.m. So she rushes herself over to the mall. At around 9:20 p.m., Amie ends her shift and she is about to head home when one of her coworkers asks her for a ride back home. Normally, Amie would give her coworker a ride, but she was actually rushing home so that her mom could perm her hair, and this meant that she would not have time to give her coworker a ride. So, Dev, what I actually don't know is what perming entails for non-Black people, aside from what I learned from the Legally Blonde movie. So, do you know anything about that?
Yes, I know. I know a little bit. Cam's also asking me because I also did hair in a past life. So the thing is, when it comes to perms, perms are primarily for non-curly hair. So perms are meant to curl hair. So though what we in the Black community often refer to as a perm is actually a relaxer, is made to relax your curls and all that good stuff. So on a person who does not have naturally curly hair, a perm is trying to curl their hair, and that can take anywhere from 1 to 6 hours, depending on the straightness of their hair. So it can take a very long time if necessary. And as Amie is from South Korea, I can very much imagine that her hair is probably thick, her hair is probably naturally straight, and her hair is probably dark. And all three of these factors are really important when you perm your hair. So it could take a long time.
Thanks, Dev. And I wanted Dev to explain that just so we can understand why Amie was like, nah, girl, I can't take you home. I really got to get home myself, because she was probably in store for a long night. So Amie says no to her coworker and walks to her car. But soon after she opens the door, someone walks up behind her and attacks her. Back at home, Amie's mother, Florence, is getting worried. Amie was supposed to be back by 9:45 p.m. and she was known for being punctual. So Florence drives to the mall to see if she can find Amie. Instead, she finds her car in the parking lot, unoccupied, unlocked, and with Amie's book bag still on the seat and her keys still in the ignition. At around 10:30 p.m., Florence calls police and explains the situation. The responding officer comes with a dog who tries to sniff out Amie's scent, but unfortunately, the dog loses her scent just 2 parking spots away from her car. So the news quickly picks up Amie's story and publishes multiple headlines about her disappearance in hopes that this will help find her. And 2 days later, on Thanksgiving Day, a couple walking their dog would find Amie's body floating in a holding tank in a neighboring town of Troy Hills. An autopsy would reveal that Amie had been stabbed twice in the chest and had also been sexually assaulted. Outside of the holding tank, there was a large pool of blood and a trail leading to the tank, which indicated that she was killed in that location and dragged into the tank by her killer. She also had defensive marks on her hands, showing that she tried to fight back. After learning of her death, Amie's family and community is in shock. Things like this did not happen in their tight-knit, family-oriented community. And many people weren't leaving their homes because they felt like if it could happen to someone like Amie, it could happen to anyone. And they would soon be proven right. Because on December 5th, 1982, at around 4 a.m., just 12 days after Amie was kidnapped, a woman approaches a truck driver with a harrowing story. She tells him that she's been stabbed and is dying, and describes to him what's happened to her. She just finished a double shift at the restaurant where she worked and made her way to her car, got in, and drove off. She didn't realize that a man had trailed her to her car and was now following her on the road. This man forced her car off the road, kidnapped her, and put her in the trunk of his car. He drives about an hour and takes her to a small rest stop on Route 80, about 30 miles away from where she was initially taken. He then took her out of the trunk and tried to sexually assault her, but when she kept fighting him, he stabbed her, threw her out of the car, and drove off. This is when she approached the truck driver and knocks on his window, and of course this driver is in shock. He doesn't know what to do. But what he does is he wraps her in a blanket and tries to comfort her while she conveys details about the nightmare that she just lived through and about the man who attacked her. She describes this man as tall and slender with bushy hair and a little bit of facial hair. Unfortunately, shortly after this, she would pass away from her wounds. But I do just want to commend her for the bravery and strength that she showed in her final moments. So let's get into who this woman is. This woman's name is Deirdre O'Brien. She was born August 29th, 1957 in New York to parents James and Georgia O'Brien. We also know that she had 3 siblings, James, Maureen, and Aaron. And at 25 years old, Deirdre was an aspiring museum curator who'd recently graduated from Seton Hall University with a major in art history. And she lived in Morris County, just like Amie, in this small town, in this area where everyone felt like they knew each other and everyone felt safe. So with Deirdre's killing, the community is now even more on edge, and they feel like they're dealing with a serial killer. Police get to work tracking down potential witnesses and interviewing as many people as they can. And because Amie and Deirdre's murders took place in different jurisdictions, there were about 100 detectives who were involved in this case in some capacity. But unlike other cases where I feel like we see apprehension to working across departments, the lead investigators in each of the jurisdictions actually took the initiative to collaborate on these cases. And this really included the New Jersey state officers and Morris County officers. And I feel like they did this because they knew that they were dealing with somebody who was not going to stop anytime soon. And they knew that their best chance of stopping him was to work together. But despite working together, the police still didn't have much evidence. They had 2 mall employees who told police they noticed someone who was parked alone in a green Chevy with a vinyl roof that was parked near Amie's car. They described this person as a man with dark hair. And to police, it seemed like this man had to have been stalking Amie because he knew where her car was, and it seemed like he knew she got off work at 9 p.m. And this showed them that this was not a crime of opportunity. This was something he had planned. They also had some witnesses near the tank where Amie was found who described seeing headlights and hearing a car, but didn't have a specific description of the vehicle. But they did have another witness who saw a late 1960s Chevy on a bridge near the reservoir where Amie was found around 10:15 p.m. on the evening of Amie's abduction. They also had collected sperm from Amie's autopsy, but since it was 1982, DNA technology was not at a place where police could actually use that to get any useful information. In Deirdre's case, the truck driver who had comforted Deirdre said that he saw what looked like a late 1960s Chevy leaving the rest stop parking lot shortly after Deirdre had approached him. And police had actually recovered tire tracks from where Deirdre was forced off the road. They noticed that these tire tracks formed a distinct pattern. And when they tried comparing these tracks to hundreds of other imprints that they had, they couldn't find a match, which showed them that this was a unique tire pattern. And by January 1983, the community and the police are putting forward a lot of effort to find Amie and Deirdre's killers and keep their community members safe. There are self-defense classes for women being held, pepper spray is being bought like never before, and the community had even put together an $8,500 reward for help finding Amie's killer and a similar reward for $24,000 in Deirdre's case. And when you adjust that for inflation, each of those rewards would have been worth $27,000 and $75,000 in 2024 money. So the community was serious about finding who killed Amie and Deirdre. They were serious about ensuring that women of their community would not also be made victims. And on the police side, they're kind of holding their breath as they're investigating because they just know that this man is going to try and kill again. So detectives decide to try something a little unconventional, and they reach out to Nancy Weber, a psychic detective. During their first meeting, Nancy tells detectives details about Amie's murder that had not been released to the public. She describes the killer as someone who is of Eastern European descent, is tall, has dark brown hair, a chiseled chin, And she says that there's a hard K in his last name. And she thinks his first name is James, but she's not sure. She says he comes from the Morris County area, but spent some time in Florida. While he was in Florida, he murdered someone and went to jail. Police would also take her on drives around the area to see what she felt and picked up. And at one point, they're in a town called Medham, and Nancy notes that there's a police officer in this town that the killer doesn't like because he'd been stopped by this police officer recently. Girl, when I was watching this episode, because I'm going to tell y'all now, I found this episode from a show called Finally Caught. When I was watching this episode, I was like, is the killer in the room with us? Because Nancy, girl, you got a lot of details. But I will say she has helped out on multiple cases. She didn't reach out to the officers herself. One of the officers actually had worked with her before and reached out to her himself.
Okay. Yeah. I got nothing. I'm utterly perplexed. I definitely find myself also being like, Nancy girl. Was good, Nancy girl. But yeah. Okay. I'm gonna wait it out. But please know that I am confused. I am perplexed. I'm currently befuddled. But I have a lot of faith in it all coming together. And if Nancy does end up being right about everything, I will completely change my stance on sidekicks because I'm a little skeptical. I'm gonna go ahead and put that out there. That's really why I'm so confused. Is why I'm making all these faces, because I'm a skeptical person about sidekicks and all the other stuff. I am.
We can get into it in the discussion.
Yeah, we can talk about it later because we're gonna have to just let that one ride for now. But I am invested.
So, like I said, police were sort of holding their breath because they felt like this killer is going to attack again. And on January 16th, 1983, around 11:20 p.m., it seemed like this fear had come true because police get a call from a man stating that he'd been attacked and stabbed. Police arrive at the home and find a man who has a stab wound on his lower back. When they ask him what happened, he says he was driving home when a car with a flashing blue light came up behind him. So believing it to be a police officer, he pulls over on the side of the road. When he and this supposed officer get out of their cars, the officer chastises him for driving too slowly. And as this man turned to walk back towards his car, he feels a sharp pain in his lower back, but is able to quickly get into his car and begin driving away. As he's driving away, he notices then that he is bleeding from his lower back. He drives straight home and calls 911. Now that police are at his home, they release an alert to other departments, letting them know that the killer is nearby and could strike again. And they also note that the place that this man was attacked was less than a mile from where Deirdre O'Brien was abducted. However, as police investigate the stabbing more, they realize that even though there are many similarities to Amie and Deirdre's cases, some things don't add up. For one, this man's wound is superficial, and it looks like it could have been self-inflicted. 2, they also notice that this man drives a 1970 green Chevy that matches the description that multiple witnesses gave of the car tied to Amie and Deirdre's murders. And the cherry on top, this man's name is James Kadadich.
Girl, now I know you lying. Stop it right now. Stop it right now.
I'm telling you the truth.
I need to take a moment to collect my thoughts. I might need to go take another lap and collect my thoughts. Because I'm not even going to lie to you. When you said man, my brain immediately went, well, that's out of the ordinary. That's not fitting the profile. That's not on brand for a serial killer. They don't ever stray from their type. I just need to collect myself a little bit. I just need to do some collecting of myself. Okay, I'm ready now. Go ahead, continue.
Y'all, Dev literally had to stand up and walk around. So police began looking into James Kadadich a little bit more. So while they're still interviewing him about this supposed stabbing, one officer calls the forensic unit and tells them to come out and take a look at this car. And when the forensic team gets there, they're able to match the tire tracks from the area where Deirdre was abducted to the tires on James's car. And police get to thinking, and they're like, this man staged this, trying to make himself look like a victim to try and throw us off the scent. Because when they continue looking into James, they find that he was actually pulled over for a traffic violation. So he probably thought that now the police know that I have this green Chevy, this 1970 green Chevy. They know they're looking for a late 1960s green Chevy. I might be on their list. So I guess in his mind, he was like, if I stab myself, they're going to be like, oh, he can't be the killer.
That reverse psychology.
Mm-hmm. So just a couple days later, in the early morning of January 19th, James Kadadich is arrested and charged with the abduction and murder of Deirdre and held on a $250,000 bond. I'm a little bit unclear as to why he was not initially charged with Amie's murder as well. I think it has to do with the evidence that they had. But police do take James's car in for a full examination, during which they find hairs that were matched to Amie and Deirdre. They also rip out the seat covers and carpet from the trunk and send it to the FBI for further analysis. The FBI is able to confirm that Deirdre's DNA is on both the seat cover and the carpet from James's car. And as they dig more into his background, they find out that James is a 34-year-old supervisor at a nearby apartment complex and lives with his mother and stepfather. They also find out that shortly before this, James had lived in Florida. Where exactly in Florida? In a prison in Florida. Because he had been convicted of murdering his roommate, 40-year-old Robert Anderson, in 1971. He claimed that in this case, Robert had made unwanted sexual advances towards him, and this is what caused him to kill him. He was charged with and convicted of second-degree murder in this case and was sent to prison. While in prison, he murdered another man, but he claimed this was in self-defense and he was never formally charged.
So homeboy's just always a victim.
Exactly. You see a pattern here, right? A Florida parole board had decided to release him in 1982, just 11 years into his sentence and 5 months before Amie's murder.
What the hell? Why? Based on what? He killed a man in prison. Based on what? That's not good behavior.
Right. He claimed it was self-defense. And in the case of his roommate, he was also only convicted of second-degree murder because I feel like he used the gay panic defense, basically, where, oh, this man came onto me and I was just defending myself. And in a state like Florida in 1982, I am not surprised that worked.
That's exactly what I thought as soon as you said it. As soon as the whole, oh, he came onto me, so I killed him thing came up, I was like, great. We're using gay panic. And of course, that's just going to fly free in the South, especially in Florida.
Right.
In the especially this was the 1970s.
You're right. Yeah, it was 1970s when this happened.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That worked. I'm surprised he wasn't found not guilty on that defense. Godly.
And my thing is, imagine if women use that same approach, where if somebody came onto us and we were uncomfortable, we just killed them.
Well, Cam, you have to understand the real problem is that people are scared of the gays. That's the problem. Everybody's scared because we don't understand people who just accept who they are and love whoever they want to love. We don't understand those people. So we're scared. Oh, my God. Especially the male fragility of the 1970s. God. Oh, my God. I could spend a whole podcast episode just talking about this. God, I hate everything about this.
Exactly. So investigators are looking at all this, and I'm sure the officer that brought in Nancy Weber is like, see, y'all, I told you.
Right, because I'm going to have to, I got to give Nancy her big one on that. I got to give Nancy her big one on that. I might need to rethink my faith in psychics.
So on May 12th, 1983, James Kadadich is formally charged and indicted with Deirdre's abduction and murder. And on December 15th, 1983, he is formally charged with Amie's murder. So let's get into the trial. Because this man just makes the worst decisions ever, he decides to plead not guilty to Amie's murder. And this means that Amie's family is forced to relive Amie's last moments and hear again and again what this man did to her. So on October 9th, 1984, the trial for Amie Hoffman's murder begins. Prosecution brings up evidence that Amie was sexually assaulted. The defense tries to counter this by saying that the evidence only shows she had sex within 24 hours of her death. So I guess they're trying to say, well, we don't know who she had sex with. But Amie's last day was well documented by her family and friends, and at no point would she have had time to actually engage in consensual sex with anyone else. Prosecution also brings up the fact that the description of the car and the man in the mall parking lot matched James and his car, and they bring up the fact that fibers found on Annie's clothes matched those from James's vehicle. They tried to enter a photo album from James's house into evidence because this album was filled with pictures of Asian women, but the judge did not allow this. But I'm gonna allow it on this podcast because that's weird.
Come on now. The fetish sizing now? Stop it.
And the defense calls James's stepbrother David to the stand, who testified that he was at home with James the night of Amie's murder playing video games. And James's mother, Julia, corroborates the statement and says, yeah, James was playing video games until 11 p.m. The defense also brings in a fiber expert, something called a microscopist, to testify that the fibers found on Amie and those from James's car were similar but not identical. And this expert points out that Amie worked in a clothing store, so the fibers on her clothes could have come from multiple places. And during a voir dire to submit additional evidence, the defense tries to call attention to Kevin Sheehan as a potential suspect. And just for our listeners, a voir dire is a legal process meant to decide issues like whether a juror can be impartial, whether a witness is fit to testify, and whether evidence is admissible. Back to our regularly scheduled programming. So who is Kevin Sheehan? Kevin was an assistant football coach at Amie's high school and was known for making quote unquote obscene calls to cheerleaders using a payphone outside of the football locker room. On the stand, Kevin concedes that he did make these phone calls, but none of them were to Amie. The judge decides that though Kevin is probably a despicable human being, the evidence against him is not admissible and nothing else connects him to Amie Hoffman. So on October 26, 1984, after a day and a half of jury deliberation, James Kadadich is found guilty of knowing and purposeful murder, killing in the course of committing kidnapping or aggravated sexual assault, and possession of a dangerous weapon for unlawful purpose. A New York Times article published the day of his conviction stated that Amie's mother Florence, her sister Kelly, and even one of the jurors cried as they read out the jury's decision. 7 months later, James would be convicted of the murder of Deirdre O'Brien. He was initially sentenced to death, but his sentence was commuted to 2 30-year terms with no chance of parole. And this commutation was due to a 2007 New Jersey bill that replaced all death sentence convictions to essentially be life without parole. So towards mid-1985, James has been tried and convicted of both Amie and Deirdre's cases. The community is still on edge, but feeling a bit safer knowing that this man is behind bars. And in April 1996, Deirdre's father starts a nonprofit called Deirdre's House, which was a child advocacy center for children who have suffered from abuse. And since its inception, Deirdre's House has helped 32,000 children who have been abused or have witnessed some kind of violence. And that is a very beautiful end to the tragic story of Amie Hoffman and Deirdre O'Brien.
Wow, friend. My biggest takeaway from this case is just wow. In every possible way. How do you let this man out of prison? How are you such a vile human being? How are you so disgusting? It's crazy to me that people like that walk amongst us. And I know this might be a controversial take, but some people just deserve to be buried under the jail. Some people just don't deserve a second chance. Again, he took advantage of the time he was living in, where he was allowed to use homophobia to escape that fate. But in my humble opinion, he should have been buried under the jail after he killed his first victim. And even if he wasn't, going to spend the rest of his life in prison after killing his first victim, it is my humble opinion that he should have after killing his second victim. And just based on the kind of person we're dealing with, I do have a very hard time believing that that second killing was in self-defense. I just have a hard time believing that. You just strike me as the kind of person who just actually enjoys hurting people, who enjoys killing people. That's what that sounds like to me. That doesn't sound like self-defense. And then for it to not even be investigated at all is insanity to me. But to move on to a more positive note, as that's how I want to wrap up today, I am happy that both of their families seem to have made peace and had closure. I've talked about it before on this podcast, but it always makes my heart so happy when people take tragic events and they turn them into positive things, where they put love back into the world, even if it was taken away from them. And I just think it's so beautiful that Deirdre's family did that in her honor. And I just hope that every person who was affected by the passing of these two women has peace, is able to feel safe, feel comfortable. Nobody should have that run through your small town. You should not feel scared like that. You should not be terrified to live where you live in your tight-knit community. Yeah, this case is crazy. And Nancy, I humbly apologize. I fully give you all respect for your psychic abilities, because maybe, just maybe, I might reconsider my thoughts on the supernatural.
I did want to talk on this point because I think there are a lot of fakers. There's definitely a lot of fakers out there. There are those people who capitalize on how badly some people want to believe that there is something else out there, that their loved ones are still here and that they can talk to their loved ones. But in those pool of fakers, I do believe that there are certain people who are connected, because I don't remember the details of this case, but I know there was a case in Chicago where there was a woman who was murdered. And I don't remember exactly where this woman was from, but she was from a place that spoke a different language. And this woman who was from that same community, like, wakes up and is like basically saying what happened to her, what happened to this woman. And it was like that woman's spirit had taken her on. I don't think they'd ever really met. She didn't really know the woman who was killed, but the woman had basically spoken to her and told her what happened. And this woman relays it to officers and says, yeah, she says it was this acquaintance who basically came in her apartment and killed her. Police check out that acquaintance, and I can't remember if he confessed or they found other evidence, but yeah, he basically did it.
Yeah, that's wild. That's wild as hell.
And that case always sticks with me because I'm like, yeah, there are certain things that happen that just don't have an explanation. And there are people like Nancy who are connected and are actually able to tell these stories.
As we wrap up today's discussion, we're going to move into our segment called Today in Crime, where we'll discuss a crime or crime-related event that took place on this day. On September 27, 1989, Hollywood socialite Zaza Gabor, who was on trial for slapping a police officer, storms out of the courtroom in the middle of the district attorney's closing argument. The prosecution told the jury that, quote, Gabor craves media attention and abused 2 weeks of this process for her own self-aggrandizement, end quote. Although her attorney objected when the prosecutor said, quote, the defendant doesn't know the meaning of truth, end quote. Gabor was already running out in tears. Gabor was accused of slapping Officer Paul Kramer during a June 14th traffic stop. She had been pulled over for expired tags on her Rolls Royce, and as Kramer checked for other violations, including having an open container of alcohol in the vehicle and an expired driver's license, Gabor drove off. When the officer chased her down and pulled her over again, Gabor slapped him. Although she claimed that she had only acted in self-defense because Kramer used excessive force in arresting her. She said that her treatment by the police was, quote, like Nazi Germany, end quote. During the trial, Gabor violated a court-imposed gag order by calling prosecution witness Amir Eslamidia, quote, a little punk with a hairdo like a girl, end quote. In a bizarre attempt to make amends with the witness, she told him that she spoke Turkish, to which the young man replied, quote, so, I'm from Iran, end quote. To which Gabor replied, quote, well, that's close, end quote.
Oh my gosh.
She said close enough. So later that day, Gabor was convicted and sentenced to 72 hours in jail, 120 hours of community service, and $13,000 in fines and restitution. Gabor would later go on to pass away in 2016. And that is what happened today in crime. If you found this story interesting, please leave a lipstick emoji in the comments.
Any other thoughts, friend?
Nope, that's all I've got.
Thank you to our listeners for joining us on this episode. I'd also like to thank the show Finally Caught and the New York Times for providing most of the material for this episode. If you'd like to check out photos related to this case, follow us at Criminalish Podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Listeners, if you like what you hear, please be sure to leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening to the Criminalish Podcast. And if you're listening on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our channel and feel free to leave any comments or questions. As always, stay nosy, my friends. Bye.
Bye.